Okay, so I'm going to explain how to identify and fix run-ons, run-on sentences, which actually aren't really sentences, they're just run-ons. But anyway, I suppose that you're watching this video because you got a paperback where a teacher knocked a few points off for having one or having several. If that's the case, I had a teacher in high school, Mr. Bordeaux, for 12th grade English, and when you would turn in a composition, half your grade would be for grammar and half of it would be for the how well in general you wrote your paper. And if you got a run-on or a fragment, uh, you would automatically get an F on the grammar half of the grade, which means that the best you could hope for was a C, even if everything else was perfect. And so it became a big deal to me. So I made sure that I always knew how this worked. So um, anyway, so what's a run-on sentence? A run-on occurs when you have two complete sentences as though they are a single sentence. I've seen it where people strung 4 or 5 of them together without really catching on. But anyway, so at a minimum, it is when you have two complete sentences that have been fused together and treated as if they're one. It does not mean it's a long sentence. You can have a really long, correctly written sentence that's not a run-on. It could be a page or 2 or 3 or 5. And still not be a run-on. Whatever you do, please don't put your readers through that kind of torture, but you could certainly have a grammatically correct long sentence that's not a run-on. And then also at the same time you could have a sentence or a run-on that would be as short as 4 words. So let's move on. So how do you identify a run-on? Well, most of us, when we're writing, uh, we write sentences correctly because they sound right, and we don't necessarily know why they're right. A lot of times we can catch errors just because they don't sound right, but if you don't know why something is correct, you're not really going to know why it's not right either. So we're going so you need to understand what a single sentence is, exactly what a single, complete, correctly written sentence is, in order to be able to tell that you put two correctly written sentences together. So we'll go on and learn that part of it. So uh, a sentence will contain a subject and a predicate. Almost all of them do. The exceptions are in dialogue. When you're writing dialogue, sometimes you won't use complete sentences because people don't necessarily speak in complete sentences, even though we're expected to generally write in them. Also, exclamatory sentences like darn, shucks, phooey, any of the words that can't be used on television in the same manner. So anyway, those are So a sentence will have a subject and a predicate. So in this sentence, I am making jambalaya for dinner. The word I is the subject, and the part of it that is am making jambalaya for dinner is the predicate. So that is a complete sentence, and it makes sense. And so we'll do another example. So in the sentence, the lightning and the thunder scared the dog. The lightning and the thunder is the subject, and so we can guess that scared the dog would be the predicate. And so so let's look at some run-ons. Um, the lightning and thunder scared the dog. He hid under the bed. So what's this here? So if the lightning and thunder scared the dog is the subject, and or if the lightning and thunder is the subject and scared the dog is the predicate, what is this over here? So what's this he hid under the bed? What that is that's another complete sentence in and of itself. And because we've put two of those together, this whole thing here is a run-on. So to kind of break that down and show you kind of why it's run on here, so that you have the lightning and thunder is the subject of one sentence, and scared the dog is the predicate of that sentence, and then this other sentence, he is the subject and hid under the bed is the predicate. So you now have these two sentences because you have two subjects. You have a subject and predicate and another subject and predicate strung together. So there are four ways to fix a run-on, and one of them, the simplest way, is to separate it into two sentences. Also, you can use what's called a coordinating conjunction and use that with a comma. They have to be used together if you're going to do it that way. You can't do a comma by itself, and you cannot do a coordinating conjunction by itself. You have to do them together, and I'll show you. And then also, you can use what's called a subordinating conjunction, which makes one of those sentences in your run-on what's called subordinate to the other, and I'll explain what that means. And then also you can use a semicolon. This one's a little tricky. It's not usable all the time. It gets misused a lot and can sometimes totally change the meaning of what's going on. So, but in this example here, it would be appropriate. So we'll go on to the next one here. And so this first one, by separating the sentences, we have put in, if you look at the underlined section, you put in the period, capitalized the second piece, and now you have two correctly written sentences separated, and just be sure to capitalize the second one. And then also to use a coordinating conjunction. Coordinating conjunctions they conjoin two sentences. And there are 7 coordinating conjunctions in the English language, and they are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And you can remember them by the first letter of each of those words, by the mnemonic fanboys, if you have to try and remember what they all are for whatever reason. And so you know that you can use one. And so let's use a coordinating conjunction and a comma. And remember that the comma and the coordinating conjunction together have to be used together to do this thing of fixing a run-on. So you have comma, then the coordinating conjunction, and you pick the one that makes the most sense. So here, so would make sense. So the lightning and thunder scared the dog, so he hid under the bed. So now this makes sense by using coordinating conjunction and a comma. If you use the comma by itself, that's called a comma splice, and that's another kind of run-on. And if you use so by itself without the comma, you still have a run-on. So, and you haven't really done haven't really fixed it. So, what's a subordinating conjunction? There are many, many, many subordinating conjunctions in English, and here's a list of kind of the more common ones. So anyway, this is how you would use a subordinating conjunction. A subordinating conjunction takes one of those two sentences and makes it subordinate to the other. And what that means is that the subordinated part of that sentence can no longer stand as a sentence on its own. And when that happens, that part of the new sentence becomes what's called a subordinate clause or a dependent clause. And those two terms are interchangeable. They mean exactly the same thing. Someone's personal preference which one they use, but a subordinating conjunction subordinates a clause, and it's called a subordinate clause or a dependent clause. So the remaining part of the sentence, the other half, that other piece that can still stand on its own, you need to have at least one of those things be able to stand on its own as a sentence without the other. And so that part of the new sentence is called an independent clause, and it means it can stand alone as a sentence without anything else. So the two sometimes are connected into one sentence by using a subordinating conjunction as long as the result makes sense. So we'll go ahead and do that with our example run-on. You can write the two clauses in either order, but you put a comma between them if the subordinate clause is first, but not the other way around. So watch closely. I'm going to show how they're used one and then the other. So, so if you use the subordinate a subordinating conjunction and we used because, notice that this subordinate clause that's in bold, because the lightning and thunder scared the dog, that can no longer stand by itself. That does not make sense unless you have he hid under the bed. So unless you have an independent clause, which is the other half that can stand on its own, a dependent clause won't make sense, and the subordinate clause won't make sense. So the rule about the comma is that if the subordinate clause is first, you put a comma after it. And then the other rule is that if you put the independent clause first, you do not use a comma between them. So the dog hid under the bed because the lightning and thunder scared him. Now we kind of had to change, dog and he and kind of where it goes, but because of a different rule called antecedents with pronouns. But anyway, so now when you have it this way, if you have the independent clause that goes first, the part that makes sense by itself, if you put that before the half that doesn't, which is the subordinate clause, if you do it this way, you do not use a comma between them, and notice that the bolded part, the subordinate clause, does not make sense by itself. So then also you have what's called a semicolon, and you can use those to connect two independent clauses. If we go back, you notice this sentence here, at the top, the lightning and thunder scared the dog is a sentence. He hid under the bed is a sentence. Both of those are independent clauses the way that they're written up there. So the thing is that if let's see, where am I? Okay, so you may be tempted to use a comma, but remember that you don't use a comma by itself or it's a comma splice. Which is just another kind of run-on. And so you can use a semicolon to connect two independent clauses. And so as long as they're, and you don't have to add anything else, but there's a couple of rules about how those get used. The two independent clauses have to be closely related in the ideas that they convey, and I'll show you one that is and one that isn't. So our example sentence we've been working with does work this way, in my opinion. It's a little bit subjective. But the lightning and thunder scared the dog, semicolon, he hid under the bed. So those are closely related because one thing led to another, or if you have two independent clauses that contradict each other, like, Sarah went to the store and John stayed at home. If you leave out the and, Sarah went to the store, John stayed at home, had a semicolon in there, that would be okay. Generally, I don't really use semicolons very much unless I'm trying to emphasize how those two thoughts are related. Otherwise, I kind of use one of the other three if I have to fix something. So in kind of the rank of punctuation, a semicolon is stronger than a comma, more important than a comma, because it can connect two independent clauses all by itself, but it's weaker than a period in that it is not what's called terminating punctuation. So now here's the example of how a semicolon would be improperly used. So if we had a sentence like, lightning struck a tree in my yard, my dog likes cheese, those are not closely related. They have nothing to do with each other. You probably wouldn't have written a run-on like that because they don't have anything to do with each other, but that's kind of to demonstrate how that doesn't go together. And also notice that in this second clause here, my dog likes cheese, I capitalized that. Well, you wouldn't use a semicolon like it's a period either. So anyway, we're done. If you have any suggestions or requests for videos on writing topics, send them to david.cook@selfteachingresources.com, and hope to get some comments. Bye.